Hello, I'm Lynn Doyle. Thank you for joining us here on Meet the Doctors, where each week we look at important health news, medical breakthroughs, and alternative therapies and how they may impact you and your family. We explore the facts so that you can make educated decisions because we want to empower you to take charge of your own well-being. Coming up on today's show, nowadays most of us can't leave the house without our smartphones. We rely on them so much. We could actually almost be addicted to them. But how about being addicted to a computer that you can wear? Today we're going to talk to a doctor who treated the first known patient addicted to Google Glass. That's a wearable computer that looks like a pair of wired-rimmed eyeglasses. And you thought video games were bad. And then later, is vitamin D the natural elixir to lowering the risk for cancer and other health problems? We'll find out if it really has natural superpowers from the sun. And of course, our panel of doctors will answer your email questions. But first, the news. This is a world first. A man paralyzed from the chest down from a knife attack has been able to walk again after a pioneering therapy involving transplanting cells from his nasal cavity into his spinal cord. In this amazing video, you see 40-year-old Derek Fidyaka walking with the aid of a support frame. Doctors in Poland, in collaboration with doctors from the UK, used special olfactory cells that form part of our sense of smell. The cells acted as pathways that enabled nerve fibers in the olfactory system to be continually regenerated. Now, in the first of two operations, surgeons removed one of the patient's olfactory bulbs and grew the cells in culture. Then 2 weeks later, they transplanted them, enabling fibers above and below the injury to reconnect. Then they used nerve grafts to bridge the gap in the cord.
You are making history now. To me, this is more impressive than a man walking on the moon.
It absolutely is. This incredible medical feat should give hope to thousands of paralyzed people. An experimental therapy for leukemia patients whose standard treatment had failed has had incredible success in prolonging their lives by genetically programming cells from the person's own immune system. The breakthrough treatment used 30 patients. There were 5 adults ages 26 to 60, and there were 25 children and young adults ages 5 to 22. All were suffering from acute lymphoblastic leukemia. However, 6 months after being treated, an incredible 23 of the 30 patients were still alive, and not only that, 19 of them have remained in complete remission. Now see, the way the special treatment works is tiny magnetic beads force the larger T cells, which are kind of an immune system cell, to multiply to produce more cancer-killing cells. The findings were recently published in New England's Journal of Medicine. Here's another reason to give up drinking those sugary sweetened sodas, besides the fact that it can make you fat and more prone to type 2 diabetes. Just 2 sodas a day over the course of your lifetime could shorten your lifespan by almost 5 years. That's right, researchers at the University of California at San Francisco studied DNA from more than 5,000 people ages 20 to 65, and they found that drinking a 20-ounce can of soda a day shortens telomeres. Now, these are the caps that keep chromosomes from unraveling, and they protect our DNA from damage. Now, these telomeres do naturally shorten with age, but the sugary drinks spur the aging process of these protective chromosome caps. If that's not enough to scare you into switching to something healthier to drink, it takes about 5 miles to walk off the 250 calories found in just 1 can of soda. This just in. Men prefer sex over food. Really? Supposedly, male brains are biologically hardwired to choose to procreate rather than to eat. You see, researchers used a species of roundworms called C. elegans that have a similar biological mechanism as a human male. The worms were then genetically modified to be abnormally hungry before they were put in a petri dish for this experiment. The worms had the option of feeding or searching for a mate. Well, the male worms overwhelmingly preferred finding a mate over food. You figure it out yourself, okay? We all know that Bono likes to wear his trademark sunglasses wherever he goes, but on a British talk show recently, he told us exactly why he always has them on.
Is something terrible wrong with you?
Yes.
Is it fatal?
A lot of people might make a lot of people happy. No, I have glaucoma for the last 20 years. The thing about glaucoma is, you know, I've perfect, or 20/20 vision, so I would go to do these eye tests, and people say, but I said, I don't really need one, because I've got perfect, I could read the bottom line, and they said, oh, that's one of the signs of a, well, you wouldn't have it. Have you ever had sort of strange visions and, you know, steam coming into the room and, you know, rings around lights? I went, oh, yeah.
He says he wears his designer shades since he's very sensitive to light as a result of the condition. And the condition is caused by an increased pressure in the eyeball, resulting in gradual loss of sight. And it wasn't just Bono this week who chose TV as a platform to announce a private medical matter. Actress Renee Russo confessed her own mental health battles on the Queen Latifah show.
What is something in your lives that you've had to push through some fear, or, you know, kind of come through some place to really take your lives one step further?
Bipolar medication?
Boom. That'll do it.
She's got me beat.
Yeah, he's got
You know,
nothing.
it's okay. You know, it's okay. You will make it through. It's not
Really?
easy, but you will make it through.
Now, as difficult as it may be for them, the good news here is that celebrities can make such a positive difference when going public about their own medical or mental health issues. Even Robin Williams, who we learned was afflicted with both Parkinson's disease and depression, brought to light a new focus on these health issues after his very shocking and tragic suicide. The honeysuckle plant is used in traditional Chinese medicine and often comes in the form of a tea. But now researchers from Nanjing University have identified a molecule within the plant that directly targets influenza A viruses. Its aim is to be used as a virological penicillin to wipe out the Spanish flu and H1N1, which is better known as the bird flu. The molecule, MR2911, represses influenza A viruses by targeting two specific genes that have been identified as being essential for its viral reproduction. To talk more about this and tell us everything we know about the flu, we're going to be joined now by our Newsmax Deputy Health Editor, Nick Tate. Nick, it's good to see you, and this sounds like it might be good news.
Well, it certainly is, Lynn. You know, the truth is that we've been talking a lot more about Ebola than flu these days. And in fact, the wall-to-wall coverage of the Ebola crisis has made the nightly news look more like something out of that old Dustin Hoffman film, Outbreak. You remember that one? Mm-hmm. But while we do need to be focused on Ebola right now, what I'm hearing from a lot of doctors is that we should not lose sight of the fact that flu and other serious infectious diseases kill tens of thousands of Americans every year. Now, for some perspective, I spoke with Dr. David Vastola earlier today. He's an internist and a gastroenterologist from Palm Beach, Florida, and has some pretty strong feelings about what we should and shouldn't be worried about when it comes to Ebola, flu, and other infectious diseases. Lynn.
Influenza kills about 35,000 Americans every year.
Mm-hmm.
It's a pretty significant organism. If you get the flu, you're going to be down 2 weeks.
Mm-hmm.
And for employers, I think it's really, really important that if someone becomes noticeably sick, that they get them out to a doctor quickly, because they will contaminate the office. It's very contagious. Mm-hmm. What's dangerous about the influenza is that it causes pneumonia, secondary to bacteria, and it can kill you within 3 to 5 days. It can take you out. Of course, the remedy is the flu vaccine, which again most people take for granted because it comes around every year after year after year, and we take it for granted.
Why do you think? I mean, I'm struck by the CDC studies that show that fewer than half of Americans actually get the flu shot. But why do you think that is?
Well, I think it's partly that we take it for granted because it's here every year. Most times you don't get it. If you do get it, you will remember it. You will remember it because you will be sick.
Can you break it down for us? I mean, what do we really need to know about the flu? Who absolutely must get the flu? What are the recommendations and what are the options?
Well, it's recommended for anybody over the age of 6 months. And of course, they have the nasal installation, which is great for kids. And certainly if you're susceptible or at risk for the disease, if you're over the age of 65, or if you're in an area where there's crowding, for example, a nursing home or convalescent facility, something like that, where there's crowding, you should absolutely get it. I think everybody should get it.
There's some evidence that some alternative practices, alternative medicine can work. Zinc may make a difference, having a healthy diet, exercise. I know you yourself have a book coming out on clinical nutrition.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up.
Well, thought you might. Tell us, I mean, are there things you can do?
Yeah, there are some things, more specifically with viruses in general. And there are some natural remedies, nutritional therapies that do work. For example, echinacea, it's been shown, works. Zinc does work. Ginseng works. So these are some things. Now, against the influenza, you know, it's like shooting an elephant with a BB gun. It may help. But with the influenza, that's a whole different organism as compared to the cold virus.
So the shot is really the vaccine is the thing, but some other practices are really healthy as well.
Right. And you know, it won't hurt.
Okay.
It won't hurt.
Dr. Vastola, thanks for being with us. Appreciate it.
All right, good advice as always from Nick Tate. Thanks so much. We're going to take a break, but when we come back, we have an amazing story about a man and his addiction to his so-called wired rim glasses. What am I talking about? Well, stay with us and find out. Welcome back to Meet the Doctors. I'm Lynn Doyle. During this next segment, we're going to talk about vitamin D. Perhaps you've been hearing about it a lot. Perhaps you've heard that you should be taking it, that if you don't have enough of it, it's bad for you. We get a lot of conflicting information, so we thought we would take this opportunity to educate us all about the natural powers of the sun, whether it's good for us or not. So let's get the experts involved here, and they're going to answer all of your questions. I know I certainly have a lot of them. Joining us now is Dr. Jane Taylor. She is a dermatologist at Jane Taylor and Associates. We're also joined by Dr. Rahat Asfar, who is a clinical instructor of dermatology at Mount Sinai, who also practices with the Dermatology and Plastic Surgery Group. And we're joined once again by Dr. Joseph Raphael, who is an internist specializing in age management. It's wonderful to have all of you here. I have to say that this is a topic in which I have great interest because I happen to live at the beach. I enjoy being outdoors, but I'm worried about the effect of long-term sun exposure. So tell me first what vitamin D is and why it's important to my health.
Vitamin D is very important because it lets the body use calcium to build strong bones. So if a person doesn't have vitamin D, then the bones get very weak, so it's problematic.
Do all of us naturally manufacture vitamin D?
Yes, we do manufacture vitamin D to a certain extent, but it's all dependent on our other overall health, our age, and how much sun exposure we get, where in the world we live, as well as the skin color.
Now explain to me why where we live makes a difference in how we manufacture vitamin D.
That's a great question. So what happens is when the sun shines on our skin, it actually causes an enzyme to form vitamin D in the skin, which then gets metabolized throughout our body in various ways. But that can only happen when you have a certain amount of adequate UVB exposure. UVB is a type of wavelength of light that comes from the sun, and it's absorbed through the skin in various quantities depending on how fair we are, as well as where in the world the latitude we're residing at.
So if, for example, you live in the northern hemisphere, like let's say Nova Scotia, you may have trouble getting enough vitamin D, but then if you live in Africa and you're dark skinned, you might actually be blocking out the benefits of vitamin D?
Well, yes, it does have to do with latitude. More sun reaches the areas near the equator and not in the northern areas. And of course, if you're also living in Nova Scotia, it snows a lot and you're indoors a lot, so you wouldn't really be getting enough.
Okay, what's the impact when you don't have enough vitamin D? What effect does it have on our bodies?
Well, it's interesting. There are myriad effects that it can have. The most dramatic being rickets. When you're a child, your bones don't grow correctly. We've largely conquered that, and now we're really looking at the more subtle manifestations of lack of vitamin D, such as an increase in risk of common cancers, breast cancer, colon cancer, cardiovascular disease, autoimmune disorders. We're finding a whole bunch of other things that we didn't think were referable to lower levels of vitamin D. And it's not the really low levels that you get when you, which cause rickets as a child, but it's sort of suboptimal levels that can cause those problems.
So I always heard that you could get vitamin D, absorb it naturally, if you were outside a lot. You either sat on the beach, or you went running, you took a walk, you sat on your front porch. Is that true or false?
Well, that's definitely true. The problem is there are risks associated with getting all that sun exposure, aside from the benefits that you get from the vitamin D. So the risks have to be weighed against the benefits, and that's where the issue comes in.
Okay, let's talk about the risk. Tell me what dangers are associated with being outdoors, even if it's a minimal amount of time every day.
Well, there is something called cumulative sun exposure over a lifetime, and there is a threshold where you can start developing skin cancers and also wrinkles, and it's a very big problem in the United States. There are like 3.5 million new skin cancers every year, and that is a big public health problem. It costs a lot of money, and there's a lot of problems in the skin for people.
So having heard what some of the risks are, what are some of the benefits of being outdoors and absorbing vitamin D through the natural sunlight?
Well, so you're not really absorbing vitamin D, you're creating it in your skin from a precursor. You can just take a pill to increase your vitamin D levels, and that's what typically is recommended, particularly by dermatologists. But there may be some other benefits to being in the sun that aren't necessarily directly from vitamin D production. For instance, setting into motion the right circadian rhythm so that you have serotonin production in the morning, and that gets turned into melatonin at night. You get a good night's sleep. These are the kinds of things that we don't know as much as we should know about that, and perhaps a small amount of sunlight daily would be beneficial for you.
Seasonal affective disorder, known as SAD, a lot of people seem to experience that when they're not exposed to sunlight on a regular basis. Any credibility to it?
Sure, there is. There's an increased risk of depression during times when you don't get your circadian rhythm set into place. There is light therapy that is recommended for that in severe cases and in cases that aren't treated with medication. You do get UVB exposure from that as well, so you're less depressed, maybe a little tan. But
see, I think a good trip to the Cayman Islands is the answer to everything. And finally, before we take a break, can you get
sure about that? Too much sun exposure or ultraviolet light sun exposure from indoor tanning is thought to possibly produce an addictive effect where people just need to be in the sunlight all the time, and then they get the bad effects.
We saw that case of the New Jersey mother who was so-called the tanning mom, and she certainly seemed like she was addicted to it. Finally, before we take our break, I do want to ask about food and whether or not we can get the necessary requirement of vitamin D through any kinds of foods that you could recommend.
So there's a lot of fortified foods, cereals and milk, juice products that have vitamin D fortification. And then there's also fish and that are oilier. Those have more vitamin D in them.
Okay.
And then also you can get from beef liver some vitamin D through that. All really amazing.
Yeah. Sorry, my trip to the Cayman is looking better. Okay, we have to take a quick break, but we're going to ask the doctors to stay around and answer some of your questions. I know you have a lot of them, particularly when it comes to this vitamin D. So stay with us, meet the doctors. We'll continue right after this. You know, carrying a smartphone is as common as carrying a set of house keys these days. But the next big vision in the future technology is the so-called Google glasses. You wear them like a pair of eyeglasses, and they can retrieve information online. They can take videos, photos, and emails. It does everything that our smartphones do, but it's controlled by our voice or by using a tiny touchpad on its side. Is it possible that you could become addicted to this? Evidently, the answer to that is yes. A 31-year-old man checked himself into the Navy's Substance Abuse and Recovery Program for alcoholism treatment, but it was determined that he also had an addiction to Google Glass. To bring this into focus, so to speak, is Dr. Andrew Doan, who is the head of Addictions and Resilience Research for the U.S. Navy in the Department of Mental Health. Dr. Doan, it's good to have you with us.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Now, we're saying that this man was actually treated for an addiction to Google glasses. How is that possible?
Well, he actually was treated for alcoholism. And however, when he checked in, we take away all electronics because we want them to focus on their recovery while they're in the 35-day residential treatment program at the what we call SARP, S-A-R-P, for Substance Abuse Rehabilitation Program. At that point in time, he was tapping the side of his face, the right side, when we were asking him questions. And when further questioning, he shared that the withdrawal from the Google Glass was greater than the withdrawal that he was feeling for alcohol.
What kind of symptoms was he experiencing as a result of this withdrawal?
That's a good question, because addictions is defined by the dysfunction in people's lives due to being without that addictive behavior. So he felt insecurity, anxiety, craving, anxiousness. So these were all emotional symptoms, but that's often what we see in addictive gambling, alcoholism, and other symptoms as well. And the other symptoms is a motor tic. So his motor tic that kept on going through the side of his face because he was trying to access information when people were asking him questions.
When you questioned this patient, how frequently had he been using the Google Glass? I would imagine it had to have been tremendous in the amount of time that he spent using it to develop an addiction.
Sure, he loved technology, and the Google Glass allowed him to wear the device for 18 hours a day for 2 months before his entry into SARP.
And as a result of you taking it away, he started to experience these physical tics, this withdrawal. Since he was the first person known to be diagnosed as having an addiction to Google Glass, how did you pursue treatment?
Well, all addictions are the same. It starts with an addict not being able to handle stress in life and not having understanding of their addictive behaviors and how that causes dysfunction in their lives. So really, during the therapy, Dr. Catherine Young, the head psychiatrist in SARP, who's an addiction specialist, typically deals with an approach of a behavioral modification, psychotherapy, and then also providing a group support for 12-step programs that are available. So by the end of this treatment, he was willing to enter a 12-step program, which is typical for any kind of addictions, really.
Do you think this is something that we are going to start to see more and more of as this technology becomes even more advanced and certainly more available to the general population?
That's a great question. Absolutely. If you track the availability of high-speed internet, you can track the incidence of video game and internet addictions worldwide. South Korea is the #1 country right now with a high, rapidly growing cases of internet addiction. Hong Kong is up there too, with an estimated 25%, I believe, based on Daria Russ's recent publication last December in 2014. So why is that? Because high-speed internet allows the mind to access images such as pornography and videos, pornography that stimulates the mind, as well as video games and information that literally turns us on. It turns on our brains, it turns us on physically. An example I give is that you look at an image, if you feel the tingles on the back of your head and the tingles on your arm, there is a neurocrine response in the body that's releasing adrenaline and other neurohormones that makes us excited.
Well, I guess I really shouldn't be surprised that there's an addiction to Google Glass, because these days we're addicted to our telephones. We take them everywhere. We have to have them. If you're 1 hour without it, you feel like you're totally disconnected. And you've been doing this research for years and years, dating back to with the internet and, as you mentioned, the games, that kind of thing. So this is just probably the next step in technological addiction.
Well, based on the case report, we can't really say any more than that. It's just a case report. But based on other research, like Dr. Douglas Gentile out of Iowa State, he did a national cross-sectional study of kids, 8 to 18. He finds that about 8.5%, that's about 3 million kids in the United States, if you take the numbers out, that are addicted to video games alone. And that wasn't even considering cell phones or internet use. So yes, this is going to be a huge problem. And really the reason why is because the human brain is not designed for rapid dopamine gratification, meaning that, like, for example, I'm having a great time being on the show. I'm getting a dopamine rush now, but it's separated by time and space. So it could be another month before I get on to be another show. However, the internet, I get on other sites, social media sites, I get video game sites, I go on the internet and search for porn. I can have an unlimited amount of dopamine rushes repeatedly without any rest period. So if there is an arousal in the body, it can be abused.
Well, it's a fascinating subject. Thank you so much for telling us about it. And we have to be aware of becoming addicted to this kind of stuff. So thanks so much. It was good to have you with us.
You're welcome, and thank you for having me.
Sure thing. We'll take a short break and we'll be back with news on vitamin D right after this. We're continuing here on Meet the Doctors with our segment where you do actually get to meet the doctors. You ask us questions and then they are so gracious to give us the answers. We always suggest, though, that you talk to your personal physician before making any kind of medical decision. Number one, how do you know if you have enough vitamin D? What kind of test is there for it?
A blood test is very simple to do. And there are certain standards that will tell whether or not you have enough vitamin D.
And following up on that then, if your doctor says to you, you have a vitamin D deficiency, do you panic or what do you do? Is there a simple solution to having a deficiency?
Yeah, absolutely. There's no reason to panic whatsoever. It's really easy to just take a supplement, and typically we recommend 600 international units, or sometimes more depending on what other medical conditions the person might have. But that's for someone who has maybe a low-level deficiency. We can do higher dosing that's specific to the patient based on the levels of their blood tests.
And is this the kind of thing that you can get over the counter, or does the doctor or physician need to recommend a vitamin or a prescription to reduce that deficiency?
It's vitamin D3. You can get it over the counter. You would think of it as just vitamin D, but it's vitamin D3. But you do not need a prescription for it, and they're available in strengths between 200 and 1,000.
How would I even know if I have a vitamin D deficiency? If I feel well, are there other symptoms that would give that indication that I have not enough vitamin D?
Well, it depends on what she means or he means by feels well. If you have severely low vitamin D, you don't feel well. You feel achy, you're tired. Patients that have come in with severely low levels, below 10, and above 30 is what we shoot for on the vitamin D test. They don't feel well. When you're in the middle range, you might feel fine, but still aren't getting maybe potentially the fullest benefits of an optimal level of vitamin D, although there's some controversy about what those might be.
And here's a follow-up to that. Is there a particular age that you start to see a decrease in vitamin D? Particularly because we have a lot of people of the postmenopausal age.
Yeah.
Does that tie in with it?
Absolutely. People who are elderly have a higher risk for having low vitamin D levels, and the supplementation for them is usually recommended at a higher dose.
If a person breaks a bone, especially if they're older, then vitamin D levels need to be done. And very often they'll find that those people are vitamin D deficient.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And as a corollary to that, actually, it's been shown in many studies that if you supplement vitamin D levels, it actually prevents falls.
How about vitamin D and cancer and other conditions? Is there a combination, or the question I believe is, can vitamin D be used to treat other conditions?
Not necessarily to treat it, specifically with regard to cancer and cardiovascular disease and the other things, but there's a lot of studies they're called observational studies, where they look at incidences of these diseases, and they're decreased in areas where there's a lot of sun exposure and typically increased levels of vitamin D. So there's a lot of intriguing evidence that might be a reason. And we don't know whether just giving back vitamin D is going to recapitulate that same benefit, but it looks like it may.
Okay. Since we have the dermatologist here with us, we might as well get as much information about our skin and our skin care as we possibly can. Does vitamin D actually decrease wrinkles or stop premature aging? And if the answer is yes, get out of the way. I'm going to the store right now, okay? The answer is not going to be yes, is it?
No. And if you're getting it from sun exposure, if you're getting your vitamin D from sun, then in fact you're actually going to have more premature aging.
How about this one? Do I need to wear sunscreen every day, even in the winter?
Yes.
The American Academy of Dermatology does suggest that, because skin cancers, some of them are due to cumulative sun exposure over a lifetime. So the 5 minutes here and the 2 minutes there count, especially as you get older.
Now, you used that term several times in our last segment, in this segment, the cumulative sun exposure. Is it too late for someone like my age that has spent a lifetime being outside? I don't burn. I always put sunscreen on. But should I just throw up my hands now, or is there anything to do to reverse sun damage?
Well, there are lots of things that can be done, and lots of things are done, such as using various creams that have vitamin A derivatives in them, lasers, fillers, Botox, peels. I mean, there are all kinds of things that we do. But it would be easier if we protect ourselves in the first place.
So we start with the little ones and make sure. I know with our grandsons, we always make sure that they're covered from head to toe, the hats, the whole thing.
So important.
But I'm not doing any of those other things, skin peels and Botox. No. I'll just have to deal with the sun damage.
In fact, it's in childhood, the blistering sunburns that children get at that time in life actually can lead to a higher risk of melanoma down the road.
So protect those grandkids. We're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we have some more questions. They're not all about the vitamin D. We're going to answer the rest of yours right after this. Stay with us. Welcome back to Meet the Doctors. I'm Lynn Doyle. This is the opportunity for you to ask questions about conditions or concerns that you might have. We put together a great panel of experts, and they try to give us as much insight as they possibly can. If you don't mind, let's just talk a little bit more about skin exams and how often we should see a dermatologist like yourselves.
At least once a year. It might be more depending on what other skin problems a person might have, what history they might have of skin cancers in themselves or in the family, or if they have a history of unusual moles in themselves or in the family, we might ask them to come more frequently. But I think every person, as a general rule, once they reach adolescence, should at least come once a year.
Adolescence, really?
Yeah.
I was thinking you were talking about being 40 or 50. So you think we should be taking the kids, the teenagers?
Once they hit adolescence, yes.
Okay. And if we go once a year, what can we expect when we actually come to visit you?
Well, a full skin exam includes looking at the scalp, looking in between the toes, looking in between the fingers, and just basically looking everywhere for abnormal growths, new growths, black spots, etc.
Oh,
and
sounds delightful.
We'll be taking your clothes off.
Any sore that doesn't heal.
Yes.
If we tend to recommend that everybody look at themselves at home at least once a month, just a quick check to see if there's anything that's changing in size or shape or color, or any sore that's not going away after a month.
And the kinds of skin cancers that are most prevalent today, is there a particular kind?
Well, the one that's most worrisome is melanoma, because that one can spread. But in terms of the other skin cancers, there are two other kinds. There are squamous cell carcinomas and basal cell carcinomas. And in the United States, there are newly diagnosed non-melanoma skin cancers 3,500,000 times. That's a lot of skin cancer.
It is. All right, now we have some questions that are of a general nature. This one says, I sit at a computer all day at work and I often end up with terrible upper back pain. What can I do besides take pain relievers?
Well, that happens a lot when you're in one position. Humans weren't really evolved to sit in this position all day long. It's bad for you from many standpoints. The spasms are likely caused from weaker muscles being stuck in one position for a long period of time, so getting up frequently I recommend patients get up once every 20 to 30 minutes actually and move around, do some stretches. It's not only good for your muscles, but it's also good for your metabolism so that you don't decrease your HDL, which happens after 20 minutes of sitting. So just get up and move. I actually have a desk that I stand up at work.
Good advice. Here's another one for you. I frequently get spasms in my neck muscles. They seem to come and go without any warning. Sometimes I actually feel movement in the vertebrae in my neck beforehand. Do you have any idea what could be causing it? And should I increase my intake of
Coenzyme
CO10?
I don't think coenzyme Q10 will help that much. If you're taking a cholesterol-lowering medication of the statin family, that can sometimes cause muscle aching, but usually not spasms. So coenzyme Q10 is good to take in general, but it wouldn't really treat that problem, I don't think.
All right, this one is about the vitamin D again, about the lack of it. Can it actually lead to an early death? Is that something that people should be concerned about that would lead to death or just poor health?
That's a good question. I think that certainly if you have very low vitamin D levels, it can lead to, we know for certain that it can lead to poor bone mineralization, and that can actually lead to, like I was saying earlier, falls, especially if your muscles are weak simultaneously. And in the elderly, we know that falls can actually increase the risk for death early. And as far as other conditions that may be exacerbated by vitamin D, the jury's still out, in my opinion.
Okay. Earlier in the show, we talked about the flu. It seems like this time of the year, we're always discussing it. So do you typically recommend people getting a flu shot if patients come in, regular dermatology visit, and they just offhandedly say, hey, what do you think about the flu shot? Should I get it or not? Where do we stand on that?
As a dermatologist, I would say yes, everyone should have a flu shot, but I think Dr. Raphael could probably better answer that question.
Yeah, I agree 100%, and that's what you should be telling the patients, and particularly the elderly and people that are less able to fight off the common infections, the flu, the strains that come around. It's important to do.
Okay, and here's another one. I've been reading so many bad things about the effects of sugary drinks. I'm trying to cut down on my soda habit. Would simply switching to diet soda help someone like me?
Well, it will help to a certain extent. It's definitely better not to have the sugar, but there are some elements in diet sodas that aren't good for you either. And then the phosphates that can leach bone from you as well. So water, tea, other things like that would be better.
Finally, is there any truth to the fact that if people drink a lot of soda, particularly when they're younger, that it will create conditions for acne? Acne, or is that an old wives' tale that sugar and chocolate and that kind of thing leads to that?
So many people ask that question. I get that all the time, especially from my teenage patients' moms who are encouraging their patients, their children to eat better. But so far, the research is not supporting those
findings.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Well, thank you so much for answering all of our questions. It was great to have you back with us, Dr. Raphael. Good to see you. And I hope that Dr. Asvar and Dr. Taylor will join us again in the future.
Thank you.
And of course, we're always so happy to have you with us here on Meet the Doctors. Until the next time, we hope that you stay happy and healthy. For Meet the Doctors, I'm Lynn Doyle.